And good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative annual meeting. So glad to be with you this morning. Hello and greetings from St. Louis, Missouri at the beautiful, expansive, and very high-tech Worldwide Technology Tech Auditorium at their world headquarters here in St. Louis. So nice to be hosted by them for this meeting and bring you a more fuller, elevated experience throughout these 3 days. We started yesterday with a very exciting announcement with the city of New Orleans, the city of Baton Rouge, other mayors, and Quantified Ventures. That we are going to expand and reopen our Environmental Impact Bond Challenge, but it's going to be bigger and better this time. It's not going to just be EIBs, it's going to be other projects that all fall into that pot of outcome investing and financing. So that's where we started yesterday. Today, we have more exciting announcements, unveilings, and reports to release of all the work that our mayors are doing with all of their partners up and down the Mississippi River. But this morning first, we're going to get into a very important topic on a new tool that's available to our states and our cities that was just passed by Congress and enacted by the president this year. Before that, however, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping just so all of you know exactly how you can participate and get a full interactive experience with our digital annual meeting this year. I'm going to hand it over very momentarily to Brant Thorington, our stage manager, take you through that. Brant?
Hi, Colin. First, if you have any questions or any issues, please feel free to message me or anyone else in the chat. As far as questions and answers go, please type them out in the question and answer box. And also feel free to raise your hand and we can recognize you to speak and directly ask your question. We look forward to an exciting meeting and thank you all.
Thank you, Brant. And for right before I get to our first session, I just want to recognize all the help that we're getting over here. This morning we have Howard with Worldwide Technologies State Local Group, who's with us today. Hi, Howard. I see you over there. And we have Michelle in the tech booth, who I continue to yell at all day for this, that, and everything else cues. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for doing all that you do for us this morning. And now I'm going to hand it over to the new mayor of La Crosse. He might be new, but boy, he's a quick learner and has jumped right in and has become a great leader already. He's been with the city for a long time. Worked very closely with a transformative mayor of ours, Mayor Tim Cabot of La Crosse, the former mayor, who basically helped us build MRCTI from scratch back in the early years of the association. But I'm very excited to introduce La Crosse's new mayor, Mitch Reynolds. We're looking forward to working with him very closely. He's already proven he's really able to operate at a very high level for his city and for the Mississippi River. So we're excited about that. And what we're going to be talking about this morning, which, as I mentioned, is this new innovative tool called the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund that was passed by Congress and enacted into law earlier this year. What does it mean? Where is it now? Is it going to be funded? And what do cities and states need to do to get ready to use this new tool and make it its full potential? So Mayor Reynolds, I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much for leading this next session.
Well, thank you, Colin, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. As Colin said, I have some big shoes to fill in place of the former Mayor Tim Cabot. Well, welcome to day 2 of the digital version of the MRCTI 10th annual meeting. My name is Mitch Reynolds. I am the new mayor of the city of La Crosse, wonderful city of La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session on implementing the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, or STORM Act. President of the United States signed the Resilience Revolving Fund into law on January 1st of this year, providing a new tool to help states and local governments achieve advanced resilience. Reflecting on resilience and work with FEMA, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce one of our annual meeting sponsors and a new member of our corporate advisory board, CSRS. Now, since CSRS is headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I will recognize Mayor Broom to bring our new friends into the conversation. Mayor Broom.
Thank you, Mayor Reynolds. And I hope you know that I have something in common with you. And that is that I did my undergraduate work at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. So glad to have you on with MRCTI, and congratulations. I'm very pleased to be introducing a new partner and board member with MRCTI, a CAB member, a company headquartered in my great city of Baton Rouge. The company is CSRS. CSRS helps mayors plan, design, fund, and implement sustainable projects, recover from disaster with more resilience, and navigate political bureaucracy so we can achieve our goals today and in the future. The CSRS team is composed of trusted advisors and facilitators committed to building stronger, smarter communities. Two of those team members are joining us this morning. One last note is of tremendous gratitude. CSRS has offered to work with our cities that were most impacted by Hurricane Ida on their recovery and aid applications at no charge. This is extremely generous and will be very valuable to our communities, especially those that sustain significant damage. Please welcome Tim Barfield, who is the president of CSRS, and Mark Goodson, the principal and resilience practice lead. Gentlemen.
Well, thank you, thank you, Mayor Broom. I appreciate that great introduction of our firm, but we also, more importantly, appreciate your leadership. This has been another tremendous challenge for our community, and thank you for your leadership through Hurricane Ida. And also, we've enjoyed our partnership with you and your administration, and I hope to continue to move our communities forward. So, good morning. And at CSRS, our mission is to build stronger, smarter communities, and this has really driven us to the forefront of resilience planning and implementation. We focus on equipping communities with the tools needed to put policies and projects and initiatives into place. Our work has spanned from helping communities incorporate resilience objectives into their budgeting process. I'm sorry? Okay. I think that was just inadvertent. So let me get back. Our work spans from helping communities incorporate resilience objectives into their planning and budgeting process to also managing the first federally funded resettlement project driven by climate change. And that's the resettlement of Ile-de-Jean-Charles in Terrebonne Parish in South Louisiana. We are adept in engaging cities at the front end of their resilience discussions and helping them find effective ways to implement both policies and projects. Of course, we always don't have the advantage of planning ahead, so we're also a leading provider of disaster recovery services. And based on recent events here in Louisiana, we're really fully engaged in that right now. Our focus is not just helping respond and recover from disaster, but also building back stronger and smarter. And this, involves effective grants management and project implementation, but it also involves a lot of innovative solutions, planning, financial strategies, financing strategies, myriad of funding sources. So I think we pride ourselves in combining all these, which can be very, very challenging with all the different regulatory frameworks which are involved. We look forward to our long-term partnership with MRCTCI and its member cities, and we look forward to learning more about your challenges, your solutions, and the proposed innovative strategies that you're putting in place. We also hope to share our experiences in implementing resilience initiatives and serve as a trusted advisor and help your communities respond and overcome the social, economic, and environmental stresses of the 21st century. And now I'm going to turn it over to my business partner and our resilience practice leader, Mark Goodson.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. As we consider the exciting discussions and advocacy occurring in this year's meeting, especially with the recent passage of the Storm Act, together with the increasing frequency and intensity of disaster events, finding creative ways to implement resilient strategies for communities of all scales is critical to reducing risk and improving resilience throughout the Mississippi River corridor. Whether that be through the buyouts and resettlement of vulnerable residences in flood-prone areas, or daylighting streams to better accommodate urban stormwater events and serve as recreational amenities, or even hardening utility grids, these investments can be a catalyst for satisfying a range of community demands and maximizing co-benefits. We recognize that access to capital is almost always a challenge for local governments looking to fortify their communities against current and future risk. This challenge has been exacerbated by the fact that despite the frequency of disaster type events and disruptions ranging from just over the past year, storms, floods, wildfires, and pandemics, the ability to borrow against future risk mitigation savings and avoided losses has been limited until now. With respect to the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, think of this as part of a quickly evolving federal resource landscape to support projects like the ones we're here to discuss. It's an exciting addition to the toolkit to help you plan for and implement these types of future-proofing projects. At CSRS, we believe it's imperative that communities begin to plan for resilient, transformative outcomes now so that they can maximize the wide array of funding opportunities that will be available over the coming months. Those funding opportunities include American Rescue Plan Act funds, this Resilience Revolving Loan Fund we'll discuss today, the FEMA BRIC program, and other traditional and alternative sources. What does the future of your community look like? What resilient outcomes do you want or need to achieve in order to get there? Is it about getting people and assets out of harm's way? What about updating building codes and development regulations, hardening against future events, or even transitioning your economy for a more resilient future? Start preparing your roadmap to resilience now and understanding the array of funding sources that are available to your community is a big step in the right direction. Thank you for having us here today.
Well, thank you, Mark and Tim. Thank you, Mayor Broom. And certainly thanks for Tim and Mark for joining MRCTI with such a charitable overture of support. We have a number of representatives from cities who are on the line who may have questions regarding what you can offer for services and abilities. I do want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions before we get into the rest of the session. My presumption is that you can do that through either the chat or simply raising your hand and asking the question. So I will open it up at this time.
It doesn't appear as though we have any questions yet, Mayor.
All right, I appreciate that, Brent. Thanks so much. And so thank you again, Tim and Mark. And of course, we look forward to working with you going forward. Something tells me that we'll be availing ourselves of what CSRS has to offer. Certainly, as Mark said, resiliency requires a lot of creativity. All right, so moving now into our session agenda, MRCTI was the original non-federal author of the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund Act, and we were fortunate to partner with critical stakeholders like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in getting it passed. They are here with us now. What makes this morning's session particularly urgent is the inclusion of $500 million for the RRF in the Senate infrastructure bill over the next 5 years. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson worked with Michigan Senator Gary Peters to get the RRF enacted. So today's discussion is particularly poignant for me. Further, I am joined today by Mayor Mike Wilson of Red Wing, Minnesota, whose member of Congress, Angie Craig, was the lead House sponsor of the RRF legislation. And I will hand the floor over to Mayor Wilson to get us started. Mayor?
All right, thank you, Mayor Reynolds. Before I begin, I just want to give a quick shout out to the American Steamboat Company for their award that they received recently for chosen as the 5th best cruise line in the world. It's the only one in the US, by the way. So So everybody from Red Wing all the way down to New Orleans, all the ports, we like to salute them and congratulate them on that award. Passage of the RRF shows how we mayors across state lines can partner and move our federal delegations collectively towards transformative outcomes. Now that we have the revolving fund as law, it looks highly likely the program will be funded through one type of appropriation vehicle or another. We need to position for implementation on the ground. Since the revolving fund is going to ultimately be a state-run program for each of our cities, I believe it's important we partner with our states and state agencies to align towards making the best, most efficient use of the new and important tool. Today, we'd like to engage in a dialogue on how states can craft and pass valuable resilience revolving loan fund enabling acts or policies, much like what the state of Maryland has already passed, and work to assemble guidance on what states can do best, be ready for the revolving fund when it's released. Questions we hope to answer through this session would include, could a model RRF enabling act or state agency policy be assembled for states, and what that would look like? And could state revolving loan fund managers provide emergency managers a best practice guide to implement revolving loan funds within public safety? And also, how can localities work with FEMA and state emergency management agencies to ensure cities and states integrate their processes through the revolving fund smoothly and in a coordinated fashion? I think each state is different and policies and procedures, but the fund is based on the state revolving fund for drinking water, wastewater, which is ambiguous across the country. States have never developed an RRF before, but they've long administrated SRFs. How can we help marry the two? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been working with MRCTI in this very inquiry and hosted a roundtable discussion to open the dialogue. And so today, we elaborate on that work and take additional steps towards implementation.
All right, thank you, Mayor Wilson. So let's move on to our discussion panel. So Chuck Chaidovitz is Vice President of Environmental and Sustainability at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Deirdre Finn is Executive Director of the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities. Its membership is comprised of state SRF directors. Matt Cowles is Deputy Director of the National Emergency Management Association, and Chaz Eby is Deputy Executive Director of the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. Both Matt and Chaz are representing state emergency managers who will be ultimately promulgating the RRF for their respective states. And Chuck, I think we'd like to start with you on how, first of all, how we got here and the robust coalition that was fielded to make the RRF our reality.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to MRCTI and all of you for including the Chamber in this morning's important discussion on resilient infrastructure. Smart, resilient infrastructure is critical to a thriving economy, creating jobs and supporting high-growth companies that can help fuel quality of life for communities across our country. Nowhere is that more relevant than the Mississippi River Basin. The U.S. Chamber has made modernizing infrastructure among our top priorities, and the business community depends on a robust network of smart, modern, resilient infrastructure. Without it, communities like the small and large ones you represent cannot keep and attract companies that are the center of our economy and the prosperity of its people. I wanted to mention a few things to set the stage for our discussion today. First, the Chamber was pleased to work with MRCTI, ASCE, and a coalition of unconventional bedfellows to support enactment of the STORM Act at the end of 2020. As was mentioned, it's an important tool in the toolbox for both companies and communities to implement pre-disaster mitigation projects. Second, we were also very pleased to collaborate with many of you to convene state emergency managers with state water and wastewater SRF managers to share experiences on what works and what doesn't work in standing up the STORM Act. It's great to be here again with Matt and with Deirdre to have that discussion. I look forward to hearing updates from them. And then third, we conveyed the outcomes from that discussion directly to FEMA, and we'll continue to engage with them to make sure as they stand up the Storm Act, they're able to get the best advice from state leaders. And finally, as was also mentioned, there's more than 47 million broadly to help build resilient infrastructure in the bipartisan infrastructure framework that passed the Senate, including 500 million direct appropriation over 5 years for the Storm Act. This is critical to getting things stand up. FEMA will not move to implement the program until the funding is in place. So this is a critical first step. We'd like to work with all of you to ensure that the House passes this bill. It's supposed to take it up before the end of the month. And so we're hopeful that that will happen. And we look forward to the conversation today. Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and thanks to the Chamber, certainly, for all the work and close collaboration with MRCTI on this effort. Now, I'd like to hand things over to the real experts that will be making the RRF a reality that we can all benefit from. We'll begin with Deirdre Finn to outline the general challenges and implications of not only designing and managing a revolving fund as a model to support infrastructure. We'll then hear from Matt and Chaz regarding their concerns for moving the RRF stateside within emergency management agencies. And we'll close with a plan to carry the conversation into the next phase. So Ms. Finn, thanks for joining us. And
good morning. Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you to Colin and Brant for including us in this conversation. Just on behalf of our board of directors, just wanted to let you know that our thoughts are with those of you who are recovering from these terrible disasters that everybody's been experiencing in the last couple of months in particular. I just wanted to start the conversation with a couple of thoughts. The first is that I really want to emphasize the power of a revolving loan program. And it provides in the clean water and drinking water SRF a permanent source of recurring funding. And just to put it in perspective, the loan repayments from both programs combined provide a permanent source of funding in the amount of about $81 billion. So that money will continue to revolve and fund new programs that would never have been built had the funds been used strictly for grants. And to put that in perspective, the capitalization grants over the last 30 years for the clean water SRF and over the last 20 years for the drinking water SRF are about 75 billion. So we've already, significantly exceeded the amount of federal funding that has gone in, and that is really the power of the revolving fund. And this is money that's protected. It's, secure from budget cuts or budget restraints. So it really is a wonderful program. It takes a while to get going and to build up those funds. But once you start going, it really does provide just a significant source of revenue for ongoing infrastructure needs. And one thing I always try and emphasize with the folks I talk to is that infrastructure investment is not an event, it's a process, it's a way of life, it's a behavior. And so every time I hear Infrastructure Week, I'm like, oh, it's really should be part of our everyday planning and preparing and mitigating, in your case, against disaster, in our case, for safe drinking water and environmental protection. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is that it is a state-run program, and in all of your branding and all of your communication, I would just continue to emphasize that it's a state-run program. We have 51 SRF programs or states. It's 50 states plus Puerto Rico. And within those states, there's separate programs for clean water and drinking water. And they're developed completely differently in every single state. There is no one template for how the state has developed. In some states, you have a financing authority that runs most of it and then has, in collaboration with the public health agency or with the Department of Environmental Protection or Environmental Quality. In other states, it is all run through the Department of Health. In other states, it's all run through the Department of Environmental Protection. Some states have boards and commissions that oversee the process. Some states are some agencies in some states are almost quasi-independent. They're of course overseen by state government and the governor and the legislature, but they really have a lot more autonomy than a state agency that falls underneath the executive branch. So there really is a lot of opportunity. I've just this morning in long overdue email sent the contact names for all of our CFA point people for all of the SRFs in your member states. And I think those for the states will be really important for them to connect, not to, in some states it could be easier. For example, Minnesota, they have a public facilities, financing authority. And so they're sort of a separate branch or a separate entity, and they do all of the financing. In other states, we have infrastructure banks where they do the financing and then work with the environmental protection and public health agencies. And they might be able to provide sort of the financial administrative support structure. Don't tell my member in Minnesota that I said that, but there is that opportunity in other states, learning for how they do that administrative process through it, sometimes through a third party, even though they're not part of the SRF per se, might be the way to do it. But really would emphasize learning how the SRF did it. Every SRF's developed their own scoring system. The SRFs for determining what projects are the priority and how they get funded. They determine their own interest rate. I know the statute requires a 1% interest rate, but they also determine a fee structure, which can be used to pay for the administrative costs. I mean, there is a lot of flexibility under that broad federal framework for implementing a plan that makes the most sense for your cities and for the communities in your state. And so I really would just, throughout everything, just continue to emphasize that, Mississippi is different than Minnesota, and that is great. And we should be looking at how we can, customize the programs in each state. Another example of the customization is that while there are a broad array of eligibilities under the federal framework, every state determines what they're going to fund. And so they have their own priorities. And in some states, they simply don't fund certain things. And that is because there's not the demand, there's not the need, and they have higher priorities. So I would just throughout your entire situation, continue to emphasize that is the best way to do it. And then I'll finally just end my opening remarks with a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, EPA and FEMA entered into a memorandum of understanding to help provide bridge financing for communities in the aftermath of a disaster. And we've had successful cases in Oklahoma and in Nebraska. The challenge always with these MOUs is that sometimes the frontline folks don't know as much about them. So I wanted to put that on the table as a way, again, to create that complementary nature of what you're doing and the clean water and drinking water SRFs, both in mitigating and preparing, but also in the immediate response after a terrible disaster. So with that, I'll just thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions that anybody might have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Finn. I appreciate you providing perspective on the revolving fund, the infrastructure process, and how each state's needs are unique. Extremely valuable information upon which we can build further. So, Mr. Carls and Mr. Eby, please take it from here.
Matt, I forget, I'm going first, right? I think so. So I'll start. Again, my name is Chaz Eby. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of MEMA Maryland. And just to get that off the table, when I reference MEMA, of course, I'm not referring to, let's see, Mississippi, Missouri, or Minnesota. But I really appreciate being invited to this. It's a privilege. In Maryland, our core partners are local jurisdictions and municipalities for disaster mitigation. And that's because all of our best ideas and execution of disaster mitigation projects are going to be done at the local most level. And so MEMA Maryland is aggressively looking at ways to both fund and coordinate disaster resilience. In 2019, we created a multi-agency disaster risk reduction working group across disciplines so that we weren't just relying on FEMA funding, but actually we are looking at all available areas of funding to reduce our disaster risk. And we've had success. Just last year, we had a $32 million project awarded through the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, which is a competitive grant to do both a green and gray infrastructure initiative along the middle branch of the Patapsco River in Baltimore City. And as takeaway number one for my short talk here, connect with your local and state emergency managers now, because FEMA has announced the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities 2021 grant opportunity, and it opens September 30th, so later this month, which will make $1 billion available to governments. But my real purpose today is to discuss the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund. The problem that we saw in Maryland was that much of the FEMA money that comes down necessitates a non-federal match. And so small and disadvantaged communities may not be able to afford 25% of a large infrastructure mitigation project. It can be in the millions of dollars. So in 2021, our General Assembly passed a law which created the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund to provide $25 million, at least initially, to help meet that non-federal match in our communities. And of course, our goal is to use that 25 million as the seed money to access the Storm Act's funding once if it gets passed into law and there's funding available. So far, we've been working very closely with our treasurer to establish this fund, which includes the rules, the loan process, and maybe most key, ensuring that we're loaning out a good amount, a correct amount of money so that the loan, our 25 million doesn't dry up before the Storm Act is passed and we can leverage those dollars. We will be accepting applications on a rolling basis with awards being made throughout the year for relevant mitigation projects. And our projects will be reviewed by representatives across state government, so not just MEMA, but also with the other members of our disaster risk reduction committee. And so my second takeaway is, of course, a revolving loan fund can bring in federal dollars to your community. So how do you get that ball rolling? And my third and maybe most key takeaway is that I believe emergency management agencies are best suited to coordinate this process and resilience more broadly. First, emergency managers are already administering preparedness and security grants, which don't just go to emergency management, but through a variety of other local partners and disciplines. And that hazard mitigation and resilient infrastructure projects necessitate a multidisciplinary approach. We need to look at not just the funds that FEMA has, but also grants and other opportunities across disciplines. And emergency managers are core functions to do just that. Interagency coordination, collaboration, and long-term planning across disciplines. And so with that, I know there'll be a number of questions which I'm happy to answer. And I'm also happy to provide more details about either our fund or any of our mitigation projects that have been either awarded or that have moved on for further review by FEMA. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thanks so much, Chaz. And hopefully any of you that saw Chaz Eby from Maryland, your question has been answered about why is Maryland on this call. They are definitely one of the leaders in this space, especially for us at NEMA. For those of you who aren't familiar, the National Emergency Management Association is the professional association that represents the state emergency management directors of all the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories. And I want to thank yet again MRCTI and Chuck and Deidre for their continued partnership in having this discussion, because as we moved from passage of a concept into law, I think it's important to build those relationships to be able to overcome some, frankly, some concerns that we had early on in the process. When you look at state emergency management organizations, oftentimes, folks at the local level look at the state and see vast resources, and folks at the state level look at the feds and see vast resources, but there are in fact limitations. And the diversity of the state emergency management agencies is no exception to that. Our organizations, the state emergency management organizations range anywhere in size from 20 or 30 personnel to over 600 personnel. So the main concern that our folks had in this coming out in the first place was one of capacity, and what will be the capacity to be able to develop a program like this. Fortunately, Deidre's been very kind in providing a lot of information that I think is helpful to show the range of thought that can be had as a program like this is rolled out at the state level. But I think it's important to know that even if this is funded, it's not just a plug and play at state agencies, and that there will be a lot of diversity of thought and implementation as this continues to roll out. So moving forward, we've been having a lot of conversations with our members. We're starting the dialogue. Obviously, Chaz and his boss, Russ Strickland in Maryland, are really leaders in this space to continue to have this dialogue. But the main points that we're continuing to impress upon them are, building capacity. What does that look like? What do you need in terms of agency support? Or second, interagency coordination and what that looks like across state governments. And the third piece to this is learning how this program will fit in with all the other mitigation programs. FEMA, everybody hears about BRIC right now. This will be a big program as well, but they're far from the only mitigation programs that are out there. And it's important that all of these programs talk to each other and that these agencies are working with one another to make sure that the use of every dollar is as valuable as possible. So I think that pretty much wraps up where we are on this at this point. This is an evolving conversation and a continuing conversation, but partnerships like between us and MRCTI and the Chamber and Deidre and the state emergency management organizations, we're here and ready and willing to encourage this discussion, but I encourage patience and an open dialogue and making sure that these programs are all integrated with one another.
All right, well, thank you, Matt and Chaz. Certainly a lot to think about here, and it's crucial we base considerations in the realities that all state emergency managers face. MRCTI does have an announcement to share that will hopefully help all parties involved in promulgating RRFs, but before we get there, I do imagine that there may be questions. So I want to open it up to questions and discussion from our audience of mayors and guests. And we can either engage in this question and answer period through raising your hand on the screen or are sending your question through the chat. And I will rely on Brant to help us through this. So if there are questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat.
It appears we don't have any.
All right.
Brant, or Mayor Reynolds, just had a point of clarification, wanted to ask Deirdre. Deirdre, is it, and I may not get the language right, but when the SRFs came out originally, were states required to pass a law in order to use them, in order to get at them, if I'm using the right language?
So the Clean Water SRF was started first. It was started actually about 10 years before the Drinking Water SRF. And in the Clean Water Act, it required that the state create the fund. And it was the guidance that came out of EPA was that they had to have an enabling statute in order to get the fund created. So your statute, I'm going to have to rely on somebody else who has better knowledge, but it didn't seem to say that you had to require the creation, that the state didn't have to require the establishment of the Enabling Act. The other part is that the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF both have state match, and the requirement is that the state match, which is 20%, that the state match be deposited before any federal funds be drawn down. I mean, the statute for both the SRFs, to me, the Drinking Water and Clean Water SRFs are a little bit more almost prescriptive, not too prescriptive, but a little bit more prescriptive on the process of how they were established. I would have to go back and just recheck, but every state does have an enabling law in order to establish the framework and to establish the fund within state law.
Okay, great. There's nothing that I know of in the STORM Act that requires explicitly states pass an enabling piece of legislation in order to receive the capitalization grant from FEMA to set the revolving loan fund up. That said, FEMA may interpret congressional intent differently and may put on some sort of requirement in that regard.
Well, and I would say that, learning from the experience of the past is that, in some states, the enabling law just sets up the fund and there's very little prescription on what's eligible or what's not, and that's left to the state revolving fund. And so those states are able to adapt a lot more. We had some states where it was very prescriptive to when it was set up, and so it took a lot of work to make any updates as over time. And some states, I think Vermont in recent years had a real expansion of their eligibilities, but that might be something to consider as you're moving forward, to have sort of a very broad, a broad enabling act where it allows the resiliency revolving fund to adapt over time to new challenges as they occur.
And I would just add that even if it's not required in the legislation, it may be required procedurally within the state to be able to affect the receipt and the dispersion of those funds.
And then I might also add that if there is an approach that we might want to recommend to FEMA to say this is an appropriate way that would be helpful to the states in either requiring or not, or providing flexibility, then let's discuss that among this group and see what we might put forward to FEMA as they develop their guidance.
Well, and the one thing I'll just mention to you is that I would be cautious about that a little bit, because every state is so different, and the state laws, are just they have to be set up a certain way in a state because of the state laws. I mean, that's what we found. I'll give an example. There's legislation to provide $43 billion in the infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure plan. A significant $15 billion for lead service line replacement. But we have some states where in the Constitution, it will prohibit the use of federal funds or state funds on private property. So, and it's hard to communicate this. So, I mean, I just really would emphasize that, the state law should prevail, and just, allow states, but really focus on that to allow the state law to prevail, because it's going to be different in every state. It just is.
No,
and that's a great thing. And that allows for 50 opportunities for innovation and customization and excellence. And I think that's really the message to send to FEMA about so much of this.
I see Representative Marino has a question, but before I get there, Mr. Eby, did you have something to add?
Just by way of example, I agree with everything the presenters have said. In Maryland, we believe the enabling legislation would do a couple things. There's what's required, but then there's also what can be helpful. And we believe that we'll have a leg up in the process by establishing this, making it more permanent, and also having the money appropriated from state funds first to be able to leverage that. So I do agree each state will have to look at this differently. In Maryland, we believe this was the best way, and we were in discussions with the legislator along the way on how best to make this without being overly prescriptive in the law, which it is in Maryland. Thank you.
Representative Marino, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I mean, unfortunately, I've been lately dealing too much with FEMA right now. But are you guys going to be supplying any type of model or legislation or something that we can use to start a draft on this revolving loan fund on the state level?
So at this point, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, at this point, Maryland has made theirs available to anybody. I don't know if that was a question to whether MRCTI was going to create something or whether something was going to be done at a more national level.
Yeah, one of the outcomes of this conversation this morning was going to be next step, create whether it be a white paper or a template or a set of recommendations and considerations, Representative, on what states should look at in terms of either creating an enabling act or a policy. Listening to Matt, which was very helpful, it's probably a foregone conclusion. Everybody's going to have to do some sort of policy work in order to intake a revolving loan fund for resilience, a capitalization grant from FEMA. But, you know, to Deirdre's point of every state being different, we didn't want to be over prescriptive, but if it's extremely helpful out of this conversation that some sort of template be provided, or we just send around what Maryland did with Chaz's help, we can do that.
Good.
Colin, just two things. I will, when I send the email around to our points of contact, I will ask them to provide you all with a link to their enabling law. So you can at least see what the states are doing on the SRF enabling law. And maybe that could be a starting point, and then compare it to what Maryland has done, who's been very advanced on this. Jeff Fretwell is our point person there. And I know he reached out, you know, right after the law was passed about how they're kind of really aggressively tackling that. The other thing I would say is that in the federal law, there is a requirement that all the funding that goes into the SRF remains in the SRF forever. That is not in the Storm Act. And that is one thing that I think if you wanted to add into your enabling laws, you know, to create a fund that is dedicated in perpetuity for disaster mitigation, preparedness, response. I mean, I think that is something that you may want to consider. It is not in the, you know, I don't believe it's in the federal statute. So it might be something that you want to consider, because again, that's what creates the power of the revolving fund for water, is that it's there forever. And that's the only thing it can be used for.
Right. I believe there is a clause or a section in the Storm Act that talks about what states must do if they decide to dissolve or liquidate their Resilience Revolving Loan Fund program. They have to, whatever funds are in the account must be allocated then in total to resilience activities before they shut down and liquidate the grant program. So in other words, in the Storm Act, a state cannot liquidate their revolving loan fund program for resilience and then take that money that happens to be left in there and do whatever they want with it. They have to divvy it out pursuant to their own process that was already pre-established and approved by FEMA for resilience activities. That's in there. Is that what you're referring to? You're referring to something?
Well,
different?
I wasn't sure if loan repayments had to be maintained in the fund. That was the big issue. So for the clean water and drinking water SRFs, all loan repayments go back into the fund, and they can never be used for anything other than eligible water projects.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's in there, perhaps not as explicitly as the RRFs, but the SRFs. But yeah, that's definitely the congressional intent, is that the repayments must go into the next resilience project. They can't go into be divvied up and divided into different pieces and go to different things and activities. They have to go into the next resilience project.
And that's the reason I raise it is because that's one of the things that the SRF said, that when there are state budget crunches, you know, and state lawmakers who have balanced budget amendments, which 49 states have some sort of balanced budget requirement, you know, they look to different, you know, sources of funding. And on paper, the SRFs, you know, have a lot of money because they have what's, you know, the retained earnings, but it's not cash. I mean, it's constantly moving around, but it's just one of those things because federal law is it's explicit that it can't be used for anything else. It really did protect that funding. And again, this goes back to sort of, you know, investment in infrastructure. It should be a behavior and an ongoing thing, as opposed to sort of a once every couple of years, or, you know, once, you know, once in a while. It really did provide that protection for those funds when there were, as we all have, economic downturns and crunches on the budget. So
Certainly.
In the chat, Mr. Eby has confirmed that he'd be happy to share Maryland's law in relation to this. Mr. Goodson, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Deirdre just said, I think, when we're talking about policy, the enabling policy or legislation obviously is a critical first step, but also creating a framework for, how those funds could best be used within the state or your community that aligns with what your resilience priorities are is really important, even though, it's pretty broad in terms of what the legislation says the funds can be used for. Sometimes that can be a challenge because with limited resources, you really want to keep those investments focused on what your greatest needs and priorities are. So really focusing on doing a little kind of strategic planning on the front end to not only enable it, but also create the framework for how best to use those funds across your state and be able to give direction to local communities, I think is also important. I'd also just like to point out that something somewhat unique about this program is that an eligible use or activity also includes zoning and land use, as well as code enforcement, which maybe isn't the sexiest thing, but is often something that is lacking in communities and can make a big impact in terms of resilience. And it's hard for communities to come up with the extra funding to sort of boost those activities. So this is something that this revolving loan fund can be used for that could be really helpful.
Ms. Finn?
thanks. I just to really put an envelope on eligibilities, and I'll give an example of what the Clean Water SRF in Arizona did to really push the envelope. So they had a significant wildfire about a decade ago. The local community and Flagstaff passed a bond measure to fund forest mitigation in order to protect the community against the ravages of this wildfire. Well, under the law, the Clean Water SRF loans have to have a water quality component. And as we all know, in Arizona, you have a wildfire followed by monsoon season, and you have mudslides. And not only is it a danger to people, but it creates a huge water quality issue. And so the Clean Water SRF was able to fund a part loan, part grant equivalent in order to help fund that forest mitigation project. So you wouldn't normally think that a clean water state revolving fund, that would be an eligible use. And in fact, it is. And we have more and more states. We have a lot of energy efficiency projects. We have a lot of water efficiency projects, a lot of innovative asset management that we're dealing with right now. So there's lots of resiliency efforts going on. Again, very different in every state. And so you have the coastal states worried about rising sea levels, but then you have, forest issues, flooding issues. Again, we are limited. We can't do flood protection, but you can marry some of these components together because oftentimes there is a water quality initiative, particularly on the Clean Water SRF. And I'll just tell you, the Clean Water SRFs, by and large, have a lot more funding than Clean Water SRFs and a lot more flexibility. So could be a great partner, but also just the lesson is really push the envelope, because if it qualifies for what you're required to do. And again, I think just going back to what Chaz said, the emergency managers know. I mean, they should be making those decisions. They should be creating the policy. They should be figuring out the intended use plan for the funds and the project priority list, and what is the most important for the state. And then, but I think the lesson from the SRFs for the water SRFs is just push the envelope.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands up. There's nothing in the chat right now. Any other questions? Any other discussion on this item?
Looks like you're good.
Mayor Reynolds?
Yes, Colin.
I just wanted to share with our panelists and speakers and experts that are on the line with us. when we move into this announcement with Mayor Kraft, please don't go anywhere if you can, if you can stay. Because even though we're sort of moving out of the panel discussion, this announcement will hopefully bring another resource or layer of organization to the discussion, and especially as to what the next steps are going to be. So that's just a safety tip that I hope, if they're able, our experts and panelists and our CSRS folks can stay on for this next announcement, because I think it will be helpful in laying a plan forward out of this workshop.
All right, so I appreciate that, Colin, and we'll move on then to concluding the session with that exciting announcement from MRCTI. And for that, I'll acknowledge Mayor Buzz Kraft from Daly, Louisiana for this portion. Mayor Kraft.
Muted. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Mayor Reynolds. This has been a tremendous session, and we want to make sure to conclude with the strategy going forward. And this has been so helpful with all the things that's going on in our country. There's a lot that we have to look forward to, and we want to continue work in collaboration with the CIFA and NEMA, and to help facilitate that relationship and better solidify channels of communication between us as mayors and our state governments. I would like to announce the creation of a MRCTI city-state task force. The task force will be populated by state legislators and mayors to coordinate and address issues that directly link cities and states, such as the new Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, container on barge, and other economic development opportunities. We have legislators that have already agreed to join the task force, and I want to identify those mayors that have been instrumental in developing this with me. Mayors Mike Bowden of Riverdale, Indiana, Phil Stang of Kimmswick, Missouri, and Belinda Constant of Gretna, Louisiana have all contributed. And I'd like to yield the floor for a few minutes now to any of those mayors that want to make additional remarks or introductions on this.
This is Mayor Stang.
Hi, Mayor, we can hear you.
Oh my God. we solved yesterday's mute problem with a different computer. But anyway, I would just like to say that I have invited, and he has graciously accepted to serve, Representative Dan Schall of the 131st District of Missouri. Dan Schall is in his 4th term in the House, and looking forward to next year running for the Missouri Senate. Dan's a very busy guy. He's also a member of the Windsor School Board, and he's the state director of Missouri's Grocery Association. So I think he'll be an outstanding contributor. And as we all say in this organization, there's no such thing as we're too busy. We just take on more stuff. So Dan's that kind of guy. So.
Thank you, Mayor Stang, Colin, Mayor Belinda Constant, City of Gretna. If I could just introduce 2 people I'm very proud of here in the city. Our state representative, Joe Marino, who has already been engaged in this conversation and asked a question earlier. I appreciate him being here and has been committed to MRCTI and the work that we do, and is very familiar with it, because Joe happened to serve as councilman in the city of Gretna before he ascended, if you will, to the state legislator, Mr. Joe. And of course, I need to recognize our new Senator, Gary Carter. Gary was elected in 2000, and actually first elected in 2016 as state rep, and then recently to the state Senate in 2021 after our Senator, Troy Carter, was elevated to Congress last year, or just at the beginning of this year. We're very proud of Troy, who has also been an advocate for MRCTI and the work that we do. You know, as Mark Goodman alluded to earlier, you know, we truly have to and have a complete need to understand smaller communities. Smaller communities, you know, when it comes to resilience, when it comes to sustainability, They don't even have the wherewithal in a lot of cases to establish a true master plan of where the community needs to go for the next generation, or a unified development code for that matter. So when we talk about, really drumming down to local government, absolutely having the support at the state level, because our senators and representatives truly know their communities and understand the need. And so I think this is a vital component of where we go with regard to this, resiliency revolving loan opportunities. So I'm truly excited. I want to say again, thank you to my state rep and to my senator for agreeing to come on board. And we want to get this done. We've got a lot of work to do relative to resilience and sustainability. And I'm happy for them to be a part of this with MRCTI. Thank you, guys.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? All right, I would like to recognize my state representative, Mr. Travis Johnson, and also my state senator, Glenn Womack. Both are new to the legislature, and they are excited to work with us as well. And I think many people can see the importance of this, because a lot of the federal funds that we are given are directed through our state agencies, whether it's GOSEF or whatever it might be. So this relationship with these senators and these representatives is very important. But anyway, thank you, mayors and legislators, for stepping up to this important role. And over the next few weeks, we will work with the MRCTI Executive Committee to complete the formation of the task force, and then put them to work coordinating with Ms. Finn, Mr. Cause, Mr. Eby, and the chamber and others to develop a set of recommendations and considerations to be shared with FEMA and the states in regards to onboarding a Resilience Revolving Loan Fund. And of course, after that, the task force will remain in place and move to other collaboration priorities. But I would say this is a pretty important first step. And there are many concerns. Are there any concerns or questions folks may have in regard to this plan? Or anybody have any questions? We'll be glad to field any questions at this time.
And I would say any representatives, state senators, anything that you'd like to chime in with or say on coming into this role with us with MRCTI and working with us on this, please, floor is yours as well. But from staff side and all of our mayors that are working on this, a big thank you to the reps and senators that have stepped up to work with us on this important issue. You've heard from Chuck and Deirdre and Matt and Chaz on how we do definitely have some work to do, and we need to make sure that we work together to ensure our states and their agencies are in the best position possible to make use of this new tool, because Chaz and Matt have been clear. There's been a concern about capacity. And how many staff are actually in our state's emergency management offices? We have states with as little as 4 people that are in there full time. So you got to come up with a match. You got to come up with the manpower and the human resources to make all this work. And our cities definitely want to be helpful to the states in that process.
This is Senator Gary Carter. I just wanted to chime in and thank you all for the good work that you're doing, and to give special thanks to Mayor Constant for putting me and Representative Marino on this task force, on this committee. I've had the opportunity to visit with leadership when they came visit to the New Orleans area. And I'm so proud of the good work that you all are doing, making sure we can put the Mississippi River to use it to drive our economy, not just the world's economy and our national economy, but just our local economies as well, to build connections across the country, across the state, and up our river. And I'm looking forward to it. And I just wanted to chime in and say how excited I am to be part of this. Thank you all. And to see my other colleagues from Louisiana. I saw Mayor Kraft earlier, Representative Travis, I saw Mayor Broom earlier. Louisiana is obviously very vital and very important to this task force and this initiative. So thank you all.
I just wanted to jump in and just say that Mayor Constant doesn't ask me to do things. She tells me that I'm doing things, but I don't mind that. I'm very excited as well to be part of this initiative. And, protecting the river for all the different reasons, not just the economic reasons, but just how important this river is to our state and to what we take it for granted, and we've been doing that for a long time. And I'm really excited that you put together this group to manage it. And it was a really eye-opening dinner when I learned about all the different states, how they're not communicating, prior to this, about how we, protect and preserve this river. And again, I'm very, glad to be a part of it and excited going forward to do what I can to help.
This is Representative Shaw from Missouri. I want to thank Mayor Stang for asking me to serve on this. The mayor and I have worked on several projects together, and what he's doing with this group and with the Mississippi River and everything throughout Missouri is outstanding. And I look forward to taking part in it. And I hope my role in the state capitol can help the group as a whole. So thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Okay, I'd like to, again, as y'all can see that we have a lot of work to do, and I'd like to thank all you guys for your comments and looking forward to working with you guys and making this thing move forward and really help our communities. And it's an exciting thing that they put together, and looking forward to working with you guys.
Mayor Kraft?
Yes.
This is Colin. So I just wanted folks to know, moving forward, we will work with state senators and representatives and your staff and our mayors to onboard this task force and keep this conversation going. And we'll have a subsequent conversation, not in the too distant future, around taking what we learned from today and putting that into something more structured that we can use, both give to our states and give to FEMA, that's informed by Deirdre and her group, as well as informed and answers the concerns and needs that Matt has outlined from his association. So very much looking forward to the next steps here. Just wanted to offer that we'll be following up with all of you to build all that and put that together in a more structured way. But much gratitude and thank you. Representative Shaw, you may know Adam Schwerden. He's a new representative in your chamber. He's actually my representative here in St. Charles City, Missouri. So I told him about this, and I think he's excited about it too. And I'll link him up with you.
He serves on a committee that I chair. So
okay,
he's a good guy.
There you go.
I saw him. We're in veto session. We're good, ready to go back to the House floor here in just a few minutes. So I'll say hi to him for you. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. No, thank you, sir. Senator Carter, so great to see you again, sir. Thanks for the dinner the other night and being such a gracious host. And both you and all the folks in Southern Louisiana, our hearts go out to you, and hope this rain event you're going through right now just is short and done very soon, and then we have a quiet fall. But appreciate you being on with us, especially with everything you're going through.
Thank you.
All right. Colin, thanks so much. Excellent stuff. Thanks, Mayor Kraft, for the exciting announcement. Certainly, thanks to all the other contributing mayors, state legislators, our expert speakers, certainly, for all their intervention this morning. We'll be working with all of you in the very near term. My thoughts also to South Louisiana. I spent a long time growing up there and in Slidell and in New Orleans. And certainly my heart goes out to everyone who, every time I see a rain event there, a flood event, or anything else that goes on there, I just think about all the challenges to deal with, and my thoughts are always with you. So I will now send this meeting back to the WWT Tech Auditorium for details regarding our upcoming press conference at session 3.
Thank you, Mayor Reynolds. And again, thanks to all our participants and partners for this session. Looks like we have some work to do, but so glad everybody's on the same page, and we now have some structure in place on how to move forward and a plan. We're now going to break. Our next session will begin at 1 p.m. Central Time. We'll break for lunch. We do have our mayor's press conference between now and then. It's at 11 a.m. Central Time. That isn't closed. It's completely open to all meeting attendees and guests. Anyone can sign on and watch it. It is for the media, but please feel free to hop on to that. Our mayors will be making 3 major announcements, reporting out the results of our expansive plastic pollution initiative report that we did with the United Nations and University of Georgia and National Geographic. And we'll be releasing the results of our natural infrastructure disaster capacity study, as well as announcing the new natural infrastructure projects that we will be deploying with Ducks Unlimited and other partners up and down the Mississippi River to mitigate for disasters, sequester carbon, clean the water, and protect vulnerable communities, reduce nutrient loading. A whole bunch of co-benefits come in with all those projects and all that work. We'll be having an in-depth session on all of that work and an in-depth analysis of the results of that report later today in the afternoon, but the press conference will cover the highlights at 11. And then we'll see you at 1 p.m. for our next session. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you really soon, and we'll sign off until 11 a.m. Thank you, everybody.